Computer and ready.
All
So
right.
good to have you here, Erwin, as a good friend, and everybody in this field knows you because of your work, your teaching, your passion, and also you have been working to expand the knowledge about the use of data analytic, about the importance using data for our sector and using the right tools. What is the importance? I know that for storytelling, for program management, the use of data is key. Years ago, for the nonprofit sector, it was not the case. Now it's a key element. What do you think about data analytic for program manager, project management, for submitting even a proposal? Right now, you have to include data analytics. What is the importance of data analytics?
Well, I think you already said that. Like, one, it's important and it's required. The reality is nowadays, we can't do the work without actually monitoring our outputs and our outcomes, but that's a larger issue, which I'm sure, or definitions, which you'll discuss in class. But the data is very important for a number of reasons. Number one, even just for the organization itself, right? To assess how are we doing? Are we meeting our stated goals? If not, where can we improve? So even at that level alone, just it's always about constant improving, right? I mean, that's how businesses are run, or well-run organizations and businesses are anyway, where you always assess what you're doing, you assess your performance. So it's not just with nonprofits, not just how well you serve your clients, but even internally, so you have data, you have metrics about, are we doing what we say we're doing, at the very simplest case, right? So there's that. Number two, the reality is funders want that, right? So, and other people who support the organization. So they want data, and it's usually the outputs, right? So how many people did you serve, and what have you? But then it's not just the funders. You're talking about other stakeholders who also want the data. So that would include, so for instance, the media, right? So like, okay, this organization says it does this, but how does it do it, right? And then your the communities in which you serve. Then you've got the regulators, you've got government. So data is asked for by various stakeholders. And you started it off actually when you said storytelling. Ultimately, it's about the story that you're telling about your organization, right? So, and it's said through numbers. And personally, for instance, I think the most effective way in making your case, whether it's for financial support or any other kind of support, is to do both numbers and an actual personal story, right? So, for example, while it's great to say that 90 cents of every dollar that you donate to my organization will go to service, that's great, or that our organization serves 100 children or 1,000 children, that might appeal to some people, but to most people, you have to pair that with a story, right? But even that's another thing, I might digress a little, is that when we talk about data and metrics, we're not just talking about numbers, right? I always say this to my students, that data includes qualitative data,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And there are instances where the reality is you cannot, the only data available to you would be qualitative data. So for instance, when it comes to hard to reach communities or vulnerable communities, right? So whether it's victims of domestic violence or the LGBTQ plus community, right? Where it's very hard to quantify or to identify or to count individuals. And sometimes you don't want that data readily available, but you can gather stories. So that's an example. So I digress a bit, but yeah, you need quantitative and qualitative. But so those are basically the reasons why you need your data. Back to your question would be to hold the organization accountable to your stakeholders, but as well as to your organization itself.
So it's not about any data. It's not about any information that you can, it's about specific tailor-made for the program, for the case, for the mission, the right key performance indicators. So it's not any data.
Well, no, in that sense that well, there are different kinds of data, but it's not just any old data, right? It's sort of, I guess one way to look at it is when people get excited, myself included, years ago, it's like big data, right? Like, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, but it's sort of like you're on a fishing expedition.
Mhm.
And the reality, if you run an organization with very limited resources, and even the largest ones still have limited, you have to be focused on the type of data you collect. So in this sense, so you have to understand what it is exactly you're measuring and why, right? Usually an organization looks at a number of data points. So first and foremost, about the people you serve, right? Or the communities you serve. And again, those could be measured by the actual number of people served, so the outputs, but also the long-term outcomes. And another data point would be on financial management, right? So how well are you using the financial support given your organization? Another one would be, which I feel strongly about, is our management data. Like how well do you manage
Mhm.
your organization? And then there are other metrics as well, right? Around, so when you go down into the subgroups, whether it's communication, like how well do people hear your message, etc. So yeah, it's not just any old data. It has to be, data for a specific purpose, and you know why. And again, it's back to because you want to make sure that you are doing your job well.
And is data is metrics just to satisfy the donor, or you recommend to expand the mind a little bit and taking advantage in looking for information that's going to be useful for the organization? Because that's the discussion all the time. We close
Absolutely.
just with the donor metrics, or we're going to expand a little bit.
Oh, no, no, no. You definitely have to do more, right? Again, partly because there's so many ways, and it's easier in a way to gather data. And sometimes you can get overwhelmed because there's so many options. Yes, while you should gather data that your funders ask of you, you need to, but
Mhm.
it's still good to get other forms of data, right? That really, again, gives you more information that will help you better serve the people you're serving, right? So, and that's number one. So it's again back to data that can help you improve your performance. For me, it's really that, right? And then number two, by gathering data beyond what is asked of you, you might even be able to make the argument to funders, right? At least to funders. And nowadays, the more enlightened ones are actually open, right? Because when it comes to data management or data analytics, usually we go understandably, right, the most basic, like the how many, right, or what have you. But sometimes you have to be creative about how you measure success, because sometimes it's not that apparent. So even when you look at numbers, so for instance, and this might go into the whole discussion of output and outcome, but part of that would be also just to think outside the box. When you say, let's give an example of educating young children, right? Usually we count that like how many classes were given, or what was the increase in grade point average, etc. But there might be other metrics, right, that can help, and you can make the argument to your funders and stakeholders. So for instance, has it really improved the well-being of the child or the student? So I guess what I'm trying to say is yes, satisfy your funders, but be open and to other forms of data that can actually help you ultimately.
And my last question,
Yeah.
there's a lot of discussion about being prisoners or being a captive by the metrics, by the data. That we need to move more to data analytic, and having the right data is not only it's good point, but you also have to have the analysis and the right approach to deal with that data.
Yes, I mean, it's not about data for data's sake, and I think that's something that happens to a lot of organizations, including for-profit organizations. So it's not just our sector, where people think because it's data, we have to gather data, and so people just gather data and spin their wheels. And but is that the efficient and effective use of time, right? So the thing to remember with any data would be like the amount of data, the volume of data, right? How fast is the data? Then you have to check the veracity. These are the four V's, right? The four V's of data and the value. So these are considerations that you have to take when looking at data. So that means that you have to be very focused, about the data you collect, but also how you collect it, right? There are many ways, and you have to be realistic. Some organizations can only use Excel, right? Or only have the resources, and that's okay. It's how do you use it? And then some organizations, sure, can start using all this amazing software and can even use artificial intelligence. Well and good. But here's again, as with data, same thing with the data tools, data management tools, or data gathering tools. Don't don't make that the end, right? Again, that is just a means to an end, which is again to better serve your organization. I mean your communities.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, Erwin. Erwin De Leon, lecturer, Columbia University, and good friend. Thank you very much for your time and for your contribution with our course and with the expanding the mind of our students.
My pleasure, Carlos. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.